a decentralized, autonomous architecture for the evolution of human civilization. Version 1.2, revised Genesis draft. Date 2025, status, theoretical framework for a Type 1 civilization governance model. The fundamental failure of historical governance lies in a structural paradox. Any system capable of accumulating power inevitably attracts opportunistic actors rather than idealists. Over time, the assumption of systemic improvement is negated, as these actors alter the governance structure solely to preserve their own dominance, leading to inevitable decay. The Lexicon Protocol does not seek to combat existing corrupt systems or engage in conflict with current hierarchies. Rather, its purpose is to define a precise destination, to give the ideal governance model a concrete flesh-and-bone form. By rendering this theoretical target tangible and operational, the protocol aims to create a gravitational pull, empowering populations to demand a transition based on the visible superiority of the new standard. To achieve this, the protocol proposes a sovereign operating system founded on radical neutrality and algorithmic precision. By stripping language of its ambiguity and converting law into immutable logic, the system eliminates the interpretation gap that historically allowed for corruption. It enforces a governance model where decision-making is shielded from populist momentum and identity politics, relying instead on blind consensus mechanisms and mathematical verification to ensure that justice remains chemically pure of human bias. It acts as a hyperstructure designed to facilitate the emergence of a consensus of conscience, independent of any single human or group. To prevent the structural decay identified in the abstract, where governance systems are inevitably altered to serve the interests of power holders, the Lexicon Protocol is anchored by a set of immutable kernel axioms. These serve as the invariant initial conditions of the hyperstructure. They are not subject to voting, interpretation, or consensus. They are the mathematical boundaries within which the system operates. The existential imperative, the primary directive of the protocol, is to maximize the probability of human biological survival and cognitive continuity. Any algorithmic output that increases existential risk is statistically invalid and automatically rejected. Systemic non-coercion, the protocol is structurally defensive. It cannot generate mandates that initiate kinetic force against compliant nodes. Authority is derived strictly from contractual consensus, not coercive monopoly. Radical neutrality, consistent with the removal of the interpretation gap, the system recognizes only nodes, entities, and transactions actions. It is architecturally blind to subjective identity markers, race, religion, gender, or nationality, rendering identity politics mathematically impossible within the kernel. Temporal consistency, entropy reduction. The system prioritizes long-term systemic stability over short-term optimization. This axiom acts as a counterweight to populist momentum, ensuring the governance structure does not degrade over time due to transient emotional states. The protocol categorically rejects technocracy, AI rule. Instead, it establishes a relationship where the human conscience remains the sole origin of authority, while the algorithm acts as the verification layer. The AI functions as a rigorous filter, stripping away the emotional volatility, populism, and ambiguity that historically allow power to be usurped by opportunistic actors. By automating the verification of logic and consequence, the system ensures that the consensus of conscience mentioned in the abstract is not merely a sentiment, but an operational reality, chemically pure of the biases that lead to systemic decay. To function as a hyperstructure independent of human hierarchy, the protocol must address the inherent vulnerability of physical and economic existence. A system that relies on state-sanctioned servers or fiat-pegged economies is theoretically subservient to the very structures it seeks to transcend. The problem: traditional digital governance relies on centralized cloud providers, e.g. AWS, Google, creating single points of failure. The structural risk: this centralization allows hostile nation-states or corporate entities to potentially switch off the system via legal coercion, kinetic attacks, or censorship. As long as the physical body of the protocol exists within a specific jurisdiction, it remains subject to the opportunistic actors identified in the abstract, rendering true sovereignty difficult to maintain. The proposed solution: the protocol envisions deployment on a DPIN, decentralized physical infrastructure network, utilizing a permissionless, globally distributed grid to mitigate these risks. The mesh architecture. Rather than a central data center, the design calls for thousands of independent providers across diverse jurisdictions to contribute GPU, CPU power, and storage. The goal is for the protocol to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Geopolitical redundancy. The architecture proposes sharding and replicating the ledger across 150-plus countries. This redundancy is designed so that a physical shutdown of the internet or power grid in one hemisphere would not stop the protocol, allowing the network to potentially heal itself via surviving nodes. Historical permanence. To mitigate the risk of history being rewritten by those in power, the framework suggests storing all constitutions, voting records, and AI audit logs on permaweb protocols, e.g. Arweave. This is intended to ensure the consensus of conscience remains immutable and censorship-resistant. The problem: historical governance systems inevitably decay into plutocracies where financial capital purchases political power. Furthermore, single-token economies are vulnerable to speculative attacks by hostile external actors seeking to crash the system. The structural risk: if money equates to voting power, the consensus of conscience is replaced by a consensus of wealth. Additionally, if the system's operational fuel can be devalued by market manipulation, the physical infrastructure risks starvation, potentially leading to systemic collapse. The proposed solution: to address these vulnerabilities, the architecture proposes a dual token economy structure designed to bifurcate governance state from utility fuel. LexID, the governance token, proposed as a non-transferable soul-bound token representing political weight. It functions as a metric of merit earned solely through verified contribution. The intent is to ensure that while money can buy resources, it cannot purchase authority within the protocol. LexWatt, the utility token, envisioned as an energy-pegged stablecoin used strictly for gas fees and server costs, acting as the metabolic fuel of the system without conveying political power. Asset management. To maintain economic sovereignty, the Treasury model suggests holding a diversified basket of real-world assets and crypto commodities. This portfolio is intended to be managed by an automated DeFi manager to hedge against global inflation. If Layer 1 secures the physical body of the protocol, Layer 2 is designed to secure its mind. The core innovation of the Lexicon Protocol is the democratization of legislation. Any node, regardless of status, can propose a law. However, granting this power to the general population introduces a critical vulnerability: the risk of subjective, discriminatory, or supremacist inputs entering the governance stream. The problem: in a system of universal participation, relying on natural language allows individuals to introduce personal prejudices into the legal framework. If users are permitted to use culturally charged or identity-based terminology, the system would be flooded with proposals asserting the superiority of specific groups or targeting others for exclusion. The structural risk: validating every free text proposal against hate speech or bias would require an impossible amount of human moderation or AI processing power. Furthermore, allowing such concepts to even exist within the system's vocabulary validates them as potential categories for legislation. The proposed solution: the protocol solves this by strictly limiting the available vocabulary via a Genesis lexicon. The sanitized database: the dictionary is envisioned to contain only neutral functional terms, e.g. entity, resource, coordinates, duration, transaction. The void space: to prevent identity politics from entering the system, the lexicon simply does not contain words related to race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. Since these tokens do not exist in the database, a user cannot mathematically formulate a sentence that references a specific group. If a concept, e.g. a specific race, has no token, it cannot be the subject of a law. The problem: even with a neutral vocabulary, the ability to arrange words freely could allow users to construct logically sound but ethically repugnant hierarchies, e.g. defining one class of users as having more rights than others. The structural risk: if the system allows users to type freely, it opens the door for supremacy proposals, laws designed to elevate one group over another. Preventing these after they are written creates conflict. The goal is to prevent them from being written at all. The proposed solution: citizens do not write laws, they assemble them using a visual block programming interface. This interface acts as a physical constraint on thought expression. Universal quantification. The interface is designed so that the subject block, the entity the law applies to, only accepts universal quantifiers, e.g., any node, every citizen, compliant entity. Structural impossibility of discrimination. The interface physically prevents the assembly of exclusionary logic. The mechanism. If a user wishes to propose a law stating that Group A is superior to Group B, they will find it impossible to execute. There is no block for Group A, and there is no logical operator for superior to in the context of rights. The user can drag the subject block, but since it only allows for all nodes, any law they create must mathematically apply to themselves and everyone else equally. The discriminatory thought cannot be serialized into code because the interface does not provide the components to build it. While Layer 2 ensures that a proposal is linguistically neutral and syntactically valid, it does not guarantee that the idea is wise. A law can be perfectly constructed yet lead to catastrophic economic or social consequences. Layer 3 acts as the rigorous stress testing environment for these proposals. The problem: the democratization of proposal power means the system will inevitably face inputs that are grammatically correct but logically incoherent or fundamentally dangerous to the system's existence. The structural risk: without an automated filter, the consensus mechanism would be overwhelmed by proposals that violate the immutable kernel axioms, e.g., laws effectively calling for self-destruction or mass violence. The proposed solution: before a proposal reaches any human eye, it passes through a neurosymbolic semantic firewall. Axiomatic validation: the AI scans the assembled block logic against the kernel axioms defined in Section 1. Function: if a proposal implies a logical contradiction, e.g., A equals not A, or violates the existential imperative, e.g., terminate all carbon-based life, the firewall rejects it instantly with a syntax error, axiom violation. This serves as an automated, non-negotiable gatekeeper. The problem: human cognition is notoriously poor at calculating second-order effects and compounding risks over long time frames. A law that seemingly solves a short-term problem may create a disaster 10 years later. The structural risk: relying on deterministic predictions, this law will fix X, creates false confidence. If the governance mechanism cannot model uncertainty and chaos, it risks ratifying policies that are fragile to black swan events. The proposed solution: accepted drafts are sent to a simulation sandbox utilizing agent-based modeling, ABM, to generate stochastic risk assessments. The process: the AI creates a virtual society with millions of autonomous agents to stress test the law over 50 simulated years under various chaotic conditions, e.g., resource scarcity, population boom. The output: confidence intervals. Instead of making binary predictions, the system outputs probability ranges to enforce epistemic humility. P50 probability: 50% chance resource efficiency improves by 4%. P90 probability: 10% chance resource efficiency declines by 2%. Tail risk: the black swan, 0.5% chance of total supply chain collapse due to feedback loops. Mandatory acknowledgement: the interface requires the proposer and subsequent voters to cryptographically acknowledge this tail risk before proceeding. The problem: a single AI model can suffer from alignment bias based on its training data. Furthermore, introducing liberal or conservative AI models would violate the protocol's radical neutrality. The structural risk: if the verification layer is biased toward a specific political ideology, the entire governance structure becomes a tool for that ideology, eroding the consensus of conscience. The proposed solution: the system utilizes a court of adversarial AIs where models debate based on optimization functions rather than political leanings. Model A, the efficiency engine, optimizes strictly for maximum resource throughput and economic velocity. Model B, the entropy inhibitor, optimizes strictly for systemic stability, safety, and risk minimization. Model C, the sovereignty watchdog, optimizes strictly for minimizing constraints on individual nodes. The synthesis: the user is presented with a summary of the conflict between these models, e.g., Model A projects high growth but Model B warns of dangerous instability. This allows the human voter to make a value judgment based on transparent trade-offs. Once a proposal has been verified by the AI as logical, risk-assessed, and structurally sound, it moves to the domain of human volition. However, the history of democracy demonstrates that unmitigated public voting succumbs to the tyranny of the majority, herd mentality, and celebrity bias. Layer 4 serves as the sterile laboratory where the true public will is distilled. The problem: in a permissionless system where any node can propose a law, the attention economy becomes a vulnerability. The network risks being flooded with millions of frivolous, niche, or spam proposals, making it impossible for the global population to focus on critical issues. The structural risk: if every proposal goes immediately to a global vote, the system creates voter fatigue. This fatigue allows organized minorities or trolls to push legislation through simply because the majority is too exhausted to pay attention. The proposed solution: before a law can occupy the global stage, it must prove its merit through a massive, statistically significant filter, the incubation jury. The mechanism: the protocol randomly selects an anonymous jury of 10,000 nodes via sortition. The function: this is not merely a spam filter, it is a micro-referendum. A sample size of 10,000 provides a high-confidence statistical projection of global sentiment. Only proposals that can convince a majority of this random cross-section are permitted to advance to the global forum. This ensures that the global attention span is reserved only for proposals with genuine broad-based merit. The problem: human decision-making is heavily influenced by social proof. If voters see that a proposal has millions of likes, or was written by a famous influencer, or is currently winning by a landslide, they tend to conform to the perceived majority rather than evaluating the content. The structural risk: this bandwagon effect corrupts the data. It transforms the vote from a measure of collective wisdom into a measure of mimetic contagion. If the system records popularity rather than conscience, it fails its existential purpose. The proposed solution: the protocol enforces a mandatory dark phase utilizing agnotologic, intentional ignorance protocols. Context blindness: when a user views a proposal, the interface strips all metadata. The user sees only the text of the law and the AI risk report. They cannot see the author's identity, preventing celebrity bias, the number of likes, preventing social pressure, or the current vote tally. Commit reveal scheme: all votes are cast using homomorphic encryption. The aggregate results remain mathematically hidden from the entire network until the voting period, e.g. 48 hours, expires. This isolation ensures that every node is alone with the logic, forcing a decision based on independent judgment rather than herd behavior. While Layer 4 establishes the popular will, history demonstrates that majorities can be manipulated, misguided, or tyrannical. A proposal passed by the masses is not yet law. It requires ratification by a mechanism designed to simulate the conscience of the species. The problem: professional politicians and elected representatives are inherently vulnerable to lobbying, corruption, and the pressure of re-election. They represent special interests rather than the collective good. The structural risk: if the final ratification power lies with a static group of individuals, that group becomes a single point of failure and a target for bribery. The proposed solution: the protocol proposes the elimination of the professional politician via sortition. Cryptographic selection: using verifiable random functions, VRF, the blockchain selects 10,000 nodes from the global pool to serve as the high jury. Coordinate-based stratification: consistent with Layer 2's radical neutrality, the system does not balance based on race or nation, which are unknown to the kernel. Instead, the proposal suggests balancing based on geocluster coordinates, ensuring diverse physical locations are represented equally, and node contribution age, balancing new users with established ones. The problem: rational ignorance. A randomly selected node, e.g. a farmer or artist, cannot be expected to grasp the nuances of complex technical legislation, such as algorithmic trade adjustments or nuclear safety protocols. The structural risk: if jurors are incompetent or overwhelmed, they will likely vote randomly or abstain, degrading the quality of decision-making. The proposed solution: to bridge the knowledge gap without introducing centralized bias, the system utilizes an expert witness marketplace. Staked expertise: subject matter experts, SMEs, stake their LexID reputation, to publish technical briefs analyzing the law. Adversarial synthesis. The AI selects the highest reputation arguments for and against the proposal, distilling them into a concise cross-examination. Jurors are tasked with judging the quality of the argument, not the technical minutiae. The problem: public opinion is easily hacked by viral slogans, emotional narratives, and media bias. A law titled the Save the Children Act might actually contain harmful provisions, but jurors would feel social pressure to vote for the title. The structural risk. If jurors vote based on social labels rather than operational reality, the system becomes a vehicle for demagoguery. The proposed solution: the jury operates in a strict cleanroom environment. Parametric abstraction. The interface strips the law of its title and marketing. The jury sees only the mathematical and semantic abstraction generated by the AI. Public view. The Free Internet Act. Jury view. Proposal 9921. Allocation of 0.5% Treasury funds to subsidize packet transmission. Isolation. The jury does not know the results of the public vote. Layer 4. They vote concurrently but blindly, shielded from the pressure to conform. The problem: while sortition ensures diverse representation, it does not eliminate positional bias. A node currently in a healthy, wealthy state naturally undervalues protections for the vulnerable. The structural risk: if specific clusters consistently vote to maximize their own advantage, the system fails to produce universal justice, producing instead cluster tyranny. The proposed solution: the protocol replaces voluntary empathy with algorithmic risk sharing. Shadow assignment. When a juror enters the voting booth, the AI simulation engine assigns them a hidden shadow identity drawn from the most vulnerable 10% of the simulation agents. Risk-based rewards. The juror's reward, LexID, is tied to the projected survival probability of their shadow identity. Mechanism: if the juror votes yes on a law, but the AI's P90 risk model indicates a high probability of harm to the shadow identity, the juror is penalized/slashed. Result: this forces the juror to audit the law specifically for tail risks and minority harm, as their own political capital is mathematically bonded to the weakest nodes. The problem: treating all laws equally causes instability. Changing a core constitutional axiom should require higher consensus than adjusting a temporary tax rate. The proposed solution: the system requires different levels of consensus based on the impact depth. Tier 1, core constitutional amendments, 80% supermajority. If 21% of the network fundamentally opposes a core rule, it is not universal. Tier 2, operational policy, 66% majority, used for resource allocation ratios and technical standards. Tier 3, emergency protocols, 55% majority plus time limit, valid only for 30 days. Automatically expires unless ratified to a higher tier later. The problem: binary voting yes-no leads to gridlock. A law with 79% support fails under Tier 1 rules, wasting the consensus effort. The structural risk: rigid rejection creates stagnation and discourages participation. The proposed solution: the system implements a constructive dissent loop. AI analysis: the system analyzes the logical categories of no votes, e.g. resource-intensive, vague. Assisted revision: the AI generates a suggested draft revision to address the specific objection. Crucially, the original human proposer must review and digitally sign this revision before it is resubmitted. This prevents the AI from becoming a legislator while facilitating consensus. The ratification of a law by the high jury is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of execution. In traditional systems, the implementation of law is delegated to bureaucracies, where intent is often diluted by incompetence or corruption. Layer 6 ensures that the consensus of conscience is translated into reality with lossless fidelity. The problem: traditional laws require human intermediaries, bureaucrats, auditors, bankers to be executed. A disaster relief bill can be passed, but the funds may take months to reach victims due to red tape or embezzlement. The structural risk: every human link in the execution chain is a potential point of failure, bribery, or delay. If the system relies on human willingness to obey the law, it is fragile. The proposed solution: the protocol proposes the total automation of digital enforcement via self-executing smart contracts. Bytecode law: once ratified, a law is not filed in a library, it is compiled into bytecode on the blockchain. Automated treasury: If a law states victims of floods in coordinates XY receive relief, the contract connects to the verified Oracle data. When the flood condition is met, the Treasury DAO automatically releases LexWatt directly to the affected wallets. There is no minister to sign the check and no official to bribe. The problem: smart contracts can move funds, but they cannot physically restrain a violent actor or protect a vulnerable node. A governance system without a mechanism for physical enforcement is merely a suggestion box. The structural risk: relying on a centralized police force reintroduces the monopoly on violence, which historically leads to abuse of power and lack of accountability. The proposed solution: to bridge the digital-physical gap while adhering to the non-aggression principle, NAP, the system utilizes a bonded enforcement network. The contract: when a node is cryptographically proven to have violated the NAP, e.g. violence, the judiciary issues a smart contract bounty for their apprehension. Staked authority: private security entities or certified individuals stake high amounts of LexWatt utility token to become enforcers. Reactive accountability: enforcers are authorized only to execute the specific contract, e.g., bring node A to rehabilitation. If they use excessive force or act outside the contract, their staked LexWatt is burned, slashed instantly, ensuring that abuse of power results in immediate economic ruin. The problem: constitutions tend to become rigid over time, failing to adapt to new technological or social realities. Changing them usually requires violent revolution or systemic collapse. The structural risk: a static system in a dynamic world inevitably breaks. If the governance model cannot evolve faster than the problems it faces, it becomes an existential risk itself. The proposed solution: the protocol treats governance as software, utilizing a Git-based version control system. Versioning: the current law operates as Constitution v1.0. Forking: peaceful secession. If a specific cluster community disagrees with the global mainnet's direction, they are not forced to comply. They can fork the protocol, soft fork. They copy the codebase, modify the contested parameter, and run Constitution v1.1 beta locally. Merging: evolutionary selection. If the fork proves successful, demonstrating superior metrics in entropy reduction and resource velocity over a 5-year period, the global mainnet may vote to merge these changes back into the core. This transforms governance from a battle of ideologies into a competition of proven results. No governance system can survive on idealism alone. This section outlines the game theoretical equilibria designed to make attacks mathematically irrational. The attack vector: a hostile actor attempts to buy control of the governance system. The game theoretic defense: separation of money and state. Non-fungible authority: governance power, LexID cannot be purchased. Even if an attacker acquires 99% of the LexWatt supply, their voting power remains 0. Thermodynamic peg: to crash the utility token, the attacker must theoretically devalue the physics of energy and compute, which is an impossibility. The attack vector: a highly motivated ideological or religious group organizes a swarm attack to impose their specific dogma. The game theoretic defense: structural containment. The lexical gap: even if the group mobilizes millions of voters, they face the Layer 2 barrier. The Genesis lexicon does not contain the theological or cultural words required to write their laws. The statistical barrier, sortition. Even if a cult has 100 million members, if they represent only a fraction of the global population, the incubation jury, 10,000 randomly selected nodes, will statistically dilute their presence. They cannot overwhelm the random sample with sheer numbers. The attack vector: a threatened nation-state attempts to physically shut down the protocol. The game theoretic defense: hydra topology, jurisdictional arbitrage. With nodes sharded across 150-plus territories, a crackdown in one region automatically increases the mining rewards in safe regions, strengthening the network elsewhere. Anonymity cost: zero knowledge proofs make identifying participants economically unfeasible for the attacker. The attack vector: jurors accept bribes. The game theoretic defense: cryptographic skin in the game. The slashing condition: since LexID is non-transferable and takes years to earn, its time value is infinite. A rational actor will not trade a lifetime of accumulated political weight for a one-time bribe, as expulsion results in a permanent loss of status that money cannot rebuy. The Lexicon Protocol marks the transition from political governance, defined by the accumulation of power, linguistic ambiguity, and the inevitable decay of institutions, to protocol governance, defined by mathematical verification, radical neutrality, and structural immutability. It addresses the structural paradox identified at the outset, that any system relying on human authority inevitably attracts opportunistic actors who corrupt it. By interposing a sovereign hyperstructure of cryptographic logic between human will and executive action, the protocol filters out the toxins of demagoguery, identity politics, and speculative corruption. We do not seek to create a ruler, but a standard. We establish a system where the law is no longer a weapon wielded by the strong against the weak, but an invariant constant, as reliable as gravity, yet anchored in the rigorously verified consensus of conscience. This is the architectural foundation for a Type 1 civilization, a structure that does not rule over humanity, but evolves with it, protecting the species from its own entropy while elevating its collective potential.